I've seen.
In the Rings of Power, Theo's black sword hilt has grown to be a significant mystery, and Episode 5 significantly contributes to removing the mystery. Here is every revelation. Here is all that the 5th episode of the Rings of Power tells us about the enigmatic black sword hilt. Theo, a teenage Southlander from the Rings of Power, was sneakily rummaging in Waldreg's barn when he came across an unsettling black sword hilt. The sword, which is obviously laced with evil power, feeds off of blood and casts a fiery blade in place of its fractured metal. With the exception of the fact that Adar, the primary antagonist from Season 1, is looking for it, the Rings of Power has said very little about the hilt's importance in its first 4 episodes. Waldreg did also claim that the hilt represents a gift from Sauron to his follower and will be used when the appointed time arrives, but his ominous words posed as many questions as they attempted to answer. Theo ultimately shows Arondir the elf the hilt in the Rings of Power Episode 5, and it goes without saying that the elf is significantly more versed on the issue than a 14-year-old mortal. While Arondir is aware of the black sword's design and has a general knowledge of its function, he is unsure of how Adar may utilize it. Arondir recognizes Theo's black sword's hilt right away since he's seen it before. A very identical sword is seen when he peels aside a portion of overgrown vegetation inside Ostirith. It has likely been there since the First Age's War of Wrath against Morgoth, when it was apparently entangled with tree roots and rock. Theo's magical hilt was the product of some lost craft, Arondir said in a later statement. These key details suggest the enchanted blades of darkness were more common once upon a time. Perhaps such swords were distributed widely among Morgoth's stronger minions during his Middle-earth reign. But Theo's broken hilt is the only piece now remaining from the Rings of Power. The second sword from the Rings of Power, the one Arondir finds in Ostirith, is very similar to the one in Theo's hands, down to the matching ornate hilt. But the sword on the mountain seems to be idle. Although it's conceivable that the power of the sword was somehow restrained by nature, it's more likely that the second blade's magic was expended after serving its intended function, as opposed to Theo's, which is still possessed of enormous strength. The discovery of numerous swords by Arondir pierces the center of a number of Rings of Power belief. The hilt of a famous sword from the Middle Past, such as Gurthang or a weapon used by Sauron, Morgoth, was widely believed to have previously belonged to it. While the artifact is indeed special, we now know it's part of a set rather than a one-of-a-kind piece. This might add credence to the popular theory that Theo's hilt is some kind of Morgul blade, one of the dark magic swords carried by the Nazgul. Even though Arondir is unsure of the magic sword's specific purpose, he is knowledgeable enough to inform Bronwyn that it is a key to something. But when all the pieces come together, there's a good possibility that Theo's sword will be the one that turns the Southlands into Mordor. Arondir recalls that the enemy commander spoke of becoming a god, of giving the orcs a home in these countries when asked about the sword's function. The elf concedes that Adar needs the hilt in order to enact this scheme. The dark sword may give Adar the ability to transform the lush and lovely Southlands into the smoky wastes that the Lord of the Rings fans know as Mordor in preparation for Sauron's reappearance. This may help to explain why Ostirith's sword is embedded in the mountain rock. In a bygone era, its terraforming power was employed to build the mountains that Ostirith is constructed atop. When warning Bronwyn that whole continents fell, who's to say what horrors this could unleash? Arondir of the Rings of Power reiterates J.R.R. Tolkien's description of Morgoth changing Middle Geography Earth to suit his goals. Perhaps the black swords contributed in some way to Morgoth's transformation of Middle-earth. Adar's wistful gaze and the words "but soon it will be gone" earlier in the Rings of Power Episode 5 provide another hint. While Joseph Maul's character is possibly planning further ahead here, Sauron will return and blacken out the sun, etc. Adar could also be alluding to the permanent darkness Mordor is renowned for. As soon as his dirty hands are around that bloodthirsty hilt, the sun goes down forever on Middle-earth's Southlands. In the Rings of Power Episode 5, Arondir gently reveals another intriguing piece of information to Bronwyn by saying the sword was made to enslave your forefathers. The Southlanders took a blood pledge to defend Morgoth during the First Age, as described in the Rings of Power, and the elves have kept a close eye on their descendants ever since. Since the Southlands region first appeared in the Rings of Power, the original text is unable to explain why it would have turned wicked. Easterlings made up the majority of the men who did join Morgoth in Tolkien's mythology, and little is known about their reasons for doing so. The Black Swords were to blame, as the Rings of Power implies. Maybe Morgoth's generals threatened to obliterate the Southlands if its inhabitants refused to submit, showing just how much damage their swords were capable. In contrast, the Rings of Power has depicted young Theo becoming more angrier and violent since taking up the black hilt, making it appear as though the object is corrupting him from the inside out. Perhaps Morgoth used black swords to subjugate rulers like the king of the Southlands, much like how Sauron used 9 rings of power to transform 9 people into his most devoted minions. The Rings of Power Episode 4 dropped a hint about Waldreg being a nasty guy, but Episode 5 makes it official. Waldreg is a unique example of a loyalist who has been patiently waiting for the return of his beloved Dark Lord, whereas the majority of Southlanders either regret their forefathers' backing of Morgoth or could care less. He doesn't simply submit to Adar because doing so is his greatest chance of surviving. He also does it since he is a fervent supporter of evil. This might explain why Waldreg first concealed the black sword's hilt under his bar. It's possible that the artifact was discovered by coincidence by the bar owner during his own lifetime, or that it was passed down from one bad ancestor to another before coming under Waldreg's custody. Either way, Amazon's The Rings of Power makes perfectly clear that Waldreg kept this broken weapon in a desperate hope that Sauron would return and use it to lead the Southlands back into the shadows. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to comment, subscribe, and give us a like.